Hello and welcome to the What Hi-Fi virtual show. And if you've only just tuned in, then where have you been? Thankfully, you've switched on at just the right time for what will most certainly be one of the jewels in the crown of this inaugural occasion. Over the next half hour, we're going on a very literal journey deep inside one of the core products we write about here at What Hi-Fi, loudspeakers. Stick with us, and in 30 minutes time, you'll have an excellent idea about how loudspeakers work, what sorts of things you might look for in your next set of loudspeakers, and you might even feel like building a pair yourself. I'm Dan Sung, What Hi-Fi writer reviewer, and with me today to take you on this journey from signal to sound are two What Hi-Fi staffers who may not have reviewed more speakers than I've had hot dinners, but possibly cooked breakfasts. So a warm and toasty welcome to technical editor Ketan Baradia, and also to double yoker and staff writer supremo Andrew Murphy. Together, these two have over 30 What Hi-Fi years between them. And how many pairs of speakers do you think you reviewed, Ketan? What do you reckon between the two of you?
I think we've probably done close to 1,000 pairs between us.
Does that include speaker packages or just pairs of speakers?
It includes everything that even resembles a speaker.
Okay, impressive nonetheless. I think it's fair to say you know a thing or two. Well, I'm glad we got that sorted. So we've got plenty to get through, but we best begin with the very basics, Ketan. So what is a loudspeaker? What is the job of the loudspeaker? How does it do that?
Yeah, job of loudspeaker is really quite simple. It takes the electrical signal from the amplifier and changes electricity into sound. And that's essentially all it does. Quite a lot of people call it a transducer, which means precisely that it converts one form of energy to another.
Okay, fair enough. Right, so we know what the aim of the game is. But what is inside a loudspeaker to make that happen? Murphy, what are the main components that we're considering here?
Well, the main things, obviously, the ones you can see from the outside. You've got your tweeter, which is used for delivering high frequencies, and then a number of drivers for the mids and the bass. You could potentially have ports and bass radiators as well, to passively help those lower frequencies. But the other most necessary part is the crossover, which takes that electrical signal and delivers high frequencies to the tweeter, maybe mid frequencies to a first bass driver, mid bass driver, and then lower frequencies to the woofer. And along with that, obviously your cabinet and a certain amount of damping as well.
Oh, okay. All right, and that's it? Is that always the lot?
Not always, for a passive speaker mainly, but you can have just about anything inside one now. Active speakers with an amplifier in it, really common. It's everything that you have as a desktop speaker or whatever. Bluetooth, obviously, and a streaming module to make these sort of standalone speaker units that we have nowadays, which could be your one box wireless speaker or something now that's quite high end.
Okay, but we're just talking about passive speakers today, so less of that kind of stuff inside. We're going to strip down to the basics and then the least complicated. So within the first group of things that you talked about, it's the drive units and the crossovers that seem to have the most moving parts going on. Can we zoom in a little more on some of these? Can you tell us about the drive units, if you would?
Well, luckily I have some here. I'm going to try and pick one up and show you. Hold it in place. Which way should we go? This way. So yeah, this is a drive unit from an old 600 series B&W speaker. This is obviously for the mids. We have tweeter looks more like this. You might have a dome rather than the cone that we have here. Fairly simple, really. You've got a magnet here, and inside a voice coil. Now, a voice coil is like an electromagnet. So as it's being fed with electrical information, it will change its polarity. And while this magnet on the outside doesn't, that in turn will make the voice coil move back and forwards. Inside, if you can see, we have this piece of cloth here, which is spider, and that essentially helps the voice coil stay, so it doesn't go side to side when it moves, it goes just back and forth. Your basket as well, which along with the outer keeps it all in place, it keeps that moving back and forth. And And on the front here, you have your cone. And this particular one has a phase plug. So you can see it's sticking out there. Or you might have just a dust cap, which is more flush, and it just stops dust essentially getting into the voice coil. So that's essentially what a driver is made up of. It's very heavy. It's heavier than it looks because it is magnets. But it's simply that. It's just meant to push air forwards and backwards.
Okay, that's great. So that's our drive units, big and small. And Ketan, what about the crossover? What's if I open one up, what would I see inside?
So typically crossovers are made out of three different types of components. You've got capacitors, inductors, and resistors. And together, and using various combinations, these are used to filter the electronic signal coming in. And provided you choose the values correctly, you can feed just the right amount of high frequencies into your tweeter, for example, and you can guide the rest of the sound to your mid-range or bass driver. But crossover is really, it's scientific in terms of you can just use the values for products, and exactly where they're going to start rolling off the frequencies and what frequencies allow through. And most manufacturers use various software programs where you just program in, the various parameters of your drive unit and your speaker. So you put in things like the volume of the speaker box, the mass of the cone, the stiffness of the suspension, all those kind of parameters. And these pieces of software will actually give you a crossover network, which works. You will get a sound. They do what they say. But for most serious manufacturers, that's merely the starting point. They take that initial crossover circuit, and then they will spend ages, days, weeks, tuning that, and tweaking it to sound the best. And that's really what separates the good speaker manufacturers from others who just follow the software and just make that product.
Okay, excellent. That's a nice view on those two things. Thank you very much, both. And this might sound like a stupid question, because it just might. Why do we actually need the cabinet? Why is there a box at all?
Okay, that's really interesting. Firstly, you need something to hold in all the drive units and the crossover and all the rest of it. There needs to be a physical package to be able to put them somewhere. So that's one practical aspect. The other, probably more important thing, is that if you didn't have a box and you had simply a drive unit, as Andrew's got there, and you played music through it, you'd find that you only really hear higher frequencies. You wouldn't hear any bass at all with those drivers. And the reason is that a drive unit fires the same amount of sound forward as it does backwards. And when sorry, we're going to get into a bit of physics here. When the wavelength of those frequencies gets to be broadly the same order as the drive unit, those waves actually travel around the drive unit and cancel each other out. So essentially you need a box to stop the waves that are firing backwards from cancelling the waves that are firing forwards. Okay. And you need the damping inside that box to actually absorb as much of that rearward sound as possible, because otherwise all it does is reflect around the box and come back out through the drive unit, adding distortion to the sound.
And do we ever see any speakers that don't use boxes? Are there any other ways of getting around the problem?
Sure, yeah. Back years ago, it wasn't unusual to see people use a separating wall between two rooms to mount a big drive unit into. So the room behind the drive unit would effectively serve as its cabinet, and the room in front of it is where you do your listening. So you have those. You have electrostatic speakers, which don't tend to have cabinets. They tend to be just hung on a frame. And you always have a compromise with the bass frequencies cancelling. But to get properly deep bass from an electrostatic speaker, it needs to be pretty big in terms of size to allow the lower frequencies to be supported.
Okay. Right. So we've got the idea of the bits and pieces of a speaker. We know where there are boxes. We know roughly what we're aiming at. So do we have all the information we need to, if you wanted to build a speaker from scratch, or what else is worth considering, would you say, Ketan?
Oh, there's so much, what we've done is pretty much like giving someone a list of ingredients and just saying, well, go and cook it. There's so much more to making a speaker than just the raw ingredients of it. And I think that's where the real skill goes in. There are a number of huge OEM drive unit manufacturers, and you can, the companies, ScanSpeak, CS, loads of them, and you can go online, you can look in the catalog, and they make numerous drive units, and you can basically go through a catalog and pick precisely the drive unit you want. It can be the size you want, it'll have the frequency response, they'll give you all the graphs and tell you all the parameters of the drive unit, and you can use them to design your speaker. And that's what a lot of smaller speaker manufacturers do. They haven't got the facility to make their own drive units, so they buy off-the-shelf units. Sometimes, if they order large enough quantities, these OEM suppliers will even modify the unit for a particular manufacturer. Which is fair enough, and then they make up the speaker from those drive units. And there's a real skill in that. It's not something that you can just, on paper, look at the specs of something, put it together and expect it to work brilliantly. It will work. You will get a sound, but it won't match the really good commercially available products out there, because that takes a lot more skill to do.
And presumably there's a lot of interplay between the different bits and pieces you might buy off the shelf and try and squeeze together as well.
Sure. Yes, there is. You have to get drive units that sound good together. So a tweeter has to have a similar sonic signature to the mid-bass driver. So when they're both producing a sound, it sounds like one complete drive unit producing the sound rather than two separate ones or three separate ones. And so things like that matter. And to do it properly, you really need the proper measurement equipment, and you need to know what you're doing. If you spot certain issues, then you've got to know how to fix them, and that's the thing that requires skill.
Okay, well, I think we're successfully frightening everybody off trying it at the moment, which is obviously a very good idea. But you've highlighted some of the mistakes that people could make, but what about the professionals? I mean, you mentioned that good speaker companies will, especially when you spoke about crossovers, will use the measurements as a starting point, but do a lot of listening to fine tune. So that's one possible error a professional could make, is not go through that process. Are there any other any other things that professionals might do and that could do better?
What, as in the speaker companies themselves?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, in terms of speaker design, what do the pros sometimes get wrong in speaker design?
I think what would really help them is to get in the best of the rivals at the price point they're aiming at, and just see how good the competition is, and make their product better than that. A lot of companies tend to be quite insular. There's the belief that because they are making a product, it'll automatically be good, and they don't really reference what's actually available enough. So that's one thing I would say you should always benchmark. It doesn't mean you make your product sound like that other brand, but it's good to know what performance level is available at any particular price point. What I would also say is, and this is really surprising to me, is that there are quite a lot of brands out there who actually don't listen to an awful lot of music through their speakers. They listen to test signals, they listen to all those kind of things, but in terms of trying their speakers with different types of music, surprisingly, quite a lot of them don't. And then they come to us for review. We'll criticize certain aspects, and the brand can't understand why, because they've never heard it with the kind of music that we heard. But we just basically pretty much play anything. We're quite a broad church here, and as far as music's concerned, and it's surprising how many brands don't do that.
Okay.
Sorry, I was going to say, this idea that there is such a thing as hi-fi music is pretty absurd. That's something that we get thrown at us sometimes, that we've not used the correct music. There is no such thing. You know, it is just meant to play music as it was recorded, whether that be good or bad.
Absolutely.
I did actually have a manufacturer who shall remain nameless, who was particularly upset at a review and complained about the fact that we played the White Stripes album. And he just said, that's not proper music. Well, you know, my speakers wouldn't play that because that's not proper music. To which we just laughed, because that's ridiculous, obviously.
It's something, I don't know, if you're building this at home, you know, we're talking about if people want to build a speaker from scratch, you've got to question right at the start, why are you building it? And not in terms of proper music, but what are you going to use it for? If you want to build a speaker to play talk radio mainly, it doesn't need to be as versatile as a speaker that's being used for, you know, in a concert hall. You know, don't want to talk about cutting corners, but short of having the musician right in front of you, you are talking about compromises when you're talking about speakers. So I think right from the off, if you're going to build a speaker, think about what you do need and what you don't from that speaker, and what's most important, because it won't be the same as our award winners, perhaps. You know, we give 5 stars because it's good at everything. If you don't need that from a speaker, then it's good to start with exactly what you need, because that's probably why you're doing it, to tailor it to your own needs.
Yeah, or possibly just the enjoyment of doing it and knowing more about hi-fi, and, you know, kind of like, I wonder if it's like building your own computer for some people as well. You know, getting your hands dirty and learning what it's all about and enjoying that satisfaction of creating something yourself. In fact, speaking of which, KB, haven't you made your own pair of speakers from scratch before?
I did. That's where my experience comes from, about all the things that can go wrong when you're trying to make your own speakers. So I had some really great drive units, sort of high-end drive units, which I come across, and then a good crossover, a really nice curved cabinet, you know, all the good things. Put it together, and it made a sound. It was actually perfectly okay, but there was so much wrong with it, and without the right equipment in terms of being able to test it, and the knowledge of, you know, the very fine adjustments you have to do to cure certain problems, it ends up quite a frustrating experience. So I just got really upset one day and just threw them away, because they just annoyed me so much. You know, after a couple of years of tinkering with them, I'd had enough. But it does inform me about how difficult it is to design speakers, and the various things you have to take account of when you're making one.
And offer a whole new level of respect to the professionals, I presume.
Of course, yeah.
But you don't need to do everything from absolute scratch, do you? Is that right, Murph? There are other ways of doing it.
There are, with a lot of help. Yeah, I think we're now going to watch me build a speaker with more success, but a lot more help than Ketan. So yeah, I built the Falcon IMF 100s. It's a build your own kit. I didn't build them as in designed them for them. And yeah, it's one of these that they send you basically all the parts, all the crossovers made for you, and you're essentially putting it together. I think we can see me doing that.
Yep, here we go. So this is like a sort of flat pack speaker build. Is that what we're talking about?
Exactly.
Okay.
Or not exactly. It's not quite flat. It's even easier than that, but similar sort of concept.
Well, I guess we'll see. So let's take a look now, and you can talk us through the process as we watch. Okay, so here we are. Andrew Murphy with his box of tricks. Murphy, tell us what was inside.
So this is one of the mid-bass drivers. You've got 2 of those in the box, only 1 in each cabinet. So these are sort of mid-sized bookshelf speaker with two-way with a tweeter and 1 mid-bass driver in each. And these are 5-inch drivers, which you can see is
and these are dust caps rather than phase plugs that we saw. Is that right?
Yes. So the phase plug that I showed you earlier that was really pointy out. This is the dust cap, which is more flush.
Okay. And what have we got in this box? What are these things?
That's the back of the 2 3/4-inch tweeters, placed in that way in that padding, but obviously you want to avoid putting them that way down on the table.
Okay, well, in case you crush the little domes.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, they're
Right.
very small, very light.
Okay. And what have we got right here? What's that?
And here's the crossovers, and also the back plates, which is where you'd put your speaker cable into.
Okay, and finally the box. Superb. How much? I mean, so just tell us again what these speakers are and how much we're looking at for a kit like this.
Okay, so for a kit, this kit, it's $14.95 to get them as we have them here. That's pounds, including VAT, and an extra 300 plus VAT to have them factory built and tested. So I will be invoicing for that.
Okay. So we're saving ourselves £300 then if you decide to build at home.
Yeah, and the rest. So it'd be 360 including VAT that you'd have to pay on top.
Okay. So what's the downside of building it yourself apart from putting the time in?
Well, I suppose without them being tested, if you do it wrong, they won't sound as good. If you did them perfectly, as I do here, obviously, they'll sound just as good as they would if they were factory built.
Okay.
I think that really is the problem with building kits of any sort. It's actually having that consistency from one side to the other side, because obviously when none of us are professionals at doing this, and if you do things just a little bit differently, some drive unit it tightens, some drive units a bit more than others, or run the wires in a slightly different way on the speakers, or when you get to the damping material, maybe don't put it in the same way in both. All of those things will lead to kind of tiny differences in the sound between the two, and affect overall performance. So that's really where the positive point from a manufacturer comes in, is that they're building everything consistently, with consistency as well. So makes a big difference.
And presumably the dampening material wasn't something you had to add with this. This is a case of what you get: the box, you get the drive unit, you get some screws.
The damping material is there as well. Yes, that's one of the things. I got this box, and pretty much, as you can see, I've not got the instructions in front of me. Once you've had a read, you can memorize what to do. It's not that difficult. But one of the things, here we are, here's the damping material. Okay. Needing to fold that and put it in the right way, facing the right way, is one of the things I suppose you could get wrong if you just guessed. And that's, as Kat was saying, something that seemingly arbitrary detail can change the sound quite a lot.
Okay, but otherwise the plugs look pretty foolproof. Did you feel that building it?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an idiot. Put it this way, I got an A-star in my music GCSE and failed IT. So there's a level of idiocy there, but I'm not an actual idiot, and I found it really easy. But there are loads of these out there. Falcon do a load more as well, which are far more involved. And this one, extremely lucky that I didn't have to do anything with the cabinet. That's already built, glued. There's no soldering involved. But you can get them from a range of suppliers, and from doing basically all of it yourself to having, just the raw materials, as you said before, flat pack, to something like this, which is, screwing it in and hopefully not messing it up too much.
And the cabinet, it looks like it's got quite a nice finish. What was it made of?
So this one is birch ply, and the standard is a walnut finish, like this one, or you can pay an extra, I think it's 160 quid, to have a rosewood finish. Okay. So that's £200 including VAT, that would be for a different finish, but those are the two here. Yeah, it's extremely lovely finish. You had to make sure I'm not scratching it with any of the Allen keys or anything. Yeah. Whether I've built it properly or not, it's one of those things that feels worth the money you'd have to pay for it, certainly.
Mm-hmm. Ketan, normally when we write about speakers, it seems to be the material of choice is MDF for the cabinets, but these ones appear to be birch ply. Is that unusual?
Yeah, birch ply is unusual. I mean, most manufacturers use MDF because it's relatively cheap. You know, it's easy to machine, and it's consistent, which really matters, because if you're going to make thousands of cabinets, you want all of them to perform the same, and that's the real advantage of MDF. Things like birch ply or any other kind of ply, we do see speakers with them on, but it's far less common because it's a more expensive way of doing things.
Okay, fair enough. So we've reached the end of the video now. Murphy, how was your experience was this building your very first speaker? Is that right?
That was my very first speaker, all sort of the finishing touches to it. I think I could probably build one that's a little more to it, but I'm not sure I'd go down Ket's route of from scratch.
Right. Did you see? Have you come across other kits, which is a bit more of a halfway house?
Yeah, certainly. As I said, there's loads of Falcon do their own. If you Google it, there are hundreds online, and you can buy separate drivers online quite easily, or go to your local hi-fi shop. I'm sure some of them have separates to sell you, but I suppose without the magic ingredient that is often the manufacturer will be you in this case. So.
Right. Okay. And do you feel inspired to go on then and try something a little tougher?
I'm not sure inspired is the word, but let's see if we do this video again next year, if we can amp it up a bit.
Oh, we'll see how that goes. Amp it up. Are you suggesting we start building your own amplifier? Is that where we're going with this?
That's precisely what I'm suggesting, Daniel, yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, perhaps we'll get Ketan to do that one next time. Ket, have you built an amplifier before?
Yes, I have. It can be done, but it's much the same kind of thing as speaker when it comes to things like knowledge and so on. Actually making something that sounds good is a lot harder than it first appears.
Right. So the message is have a tinker, enjoy yourself, but if you really want something good at the end of the day, maybe buy it straight from the manufacturer.
For most people, I think that's the answer.
Yeah, I think that's the answer for me. Well, thank you very much, both of you. I've really enjoyed this, and I think it's great to really get close and have a good look at some of these things we review. So, Murphy, appreciate your work and the time you put into us, and your efforts building the speaker, and Ketan for your enormous knowledge base. Which just leaves us to say thanks for tuning in for this one, and if you've enjoyed it, go onto our website, read more about speakers and about our speaker reviews and how to set them up and all sorts of other brilliant features. And enjoy the rest of the show. Do tune in to the other sessions we've got. So thank you very much for watching and take care.